Welcome to Rise and Relate with Rissa. And on today's episode, I will be discussing why, regardless of what we do, we get up and we vote. And for obvious reasons, we get up and we vote, whether it's voting for the two that are at the forefront or voting for someone else that's not even on the ballot and writing it down. We get up and vote because of all of the decades that we went without being able to vote. So being able to exercise your right to vote is the same thing as being able to exercise your right to a passport and being able to travel and go to different countries. It symbolizes something way more significant than you just decided I don't want to vote for anybody and I'd rather not let my vote be counted. Your vote matters because when it comes to who will end up as our next president going into the 2025 term, we really want to take a great look at that Project 2025 proposal. And if you have not already gotten a chance to just look at what's being proposed, I strongly recommend you take a look at it. And I'm going to be quite honest with you. I looked at that proposal way back in the summer. And because I already do a lot of anti-racist work, I do a lot of readings on just what's going on in the world. I talk about it weekly in certain support groups. To read and digest what that proposal was, honestly created detachment and dissociation, because to know that if Trump was elected to be our next president and this agenda was pushed completely forward, I couldn't imagine a century where we are enduring some of those same pains as our ancestors. I couldn't imagine this generation, the generations before me, after me, to go through what our ancestors endured. And it will truly, like, reading it kind of almost made me think about, like, how far have we really come in 2024, especially if we're even talking about Project 2025. So with that being said, as you guys know, some of my earlier podcast episodes were surrounded around that workplace trauma. And part of that Project 25 agenda is that Project 2025 will dismantle the civil rights protection, which will weaken the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which means that it will reduce the anti-discrimination and enforcement in hiring, meaning that if they have racist practices in hiring, those things will only be exacerbated. And it would be even more difficult for Black men and Black women to gain employment and then also to be protected in toxic, unhealthy work environments and to have rights within their workplace. And coming from the social work field, this is a huge one because social work oppresses social workers. So when you start to think about the intersections of gender and race and socioeconomical class of different social workers and working in the field, just what this would look like, we can't show up and do our jobs if not only our profession marginalize and oppress us, but if there's literally legal authorization per se that gives employers the right to create this harm and barriers when it comes to employment. And then when we go and we try to use the EEOC to protect ourselves, to, go into lawsuits that can help us, whether it's monetary settlement, it is some type of robust package, it's something that essentially gives us some compensation for the pain and suffering that we endured. If we no longer have that, then quite frankly, modern day slavery is very much overt. It's going to happen overtly right in front of us. And we can't do anything about it because then we have to live. And I watched this clip of this Black woman that was alive during the time that they had to pay to vote, $2. And back then, $2 was a lot of money. And how it was a barrier that Black men and women had to pay to vote because it meant that they couldn't go to work. And to jeopardize their work, or to jeopardize being fired or not being paid when they had families to feed, left a lot of Black people in positions that they couldn't risk, meaning that they couldn't go to the polls to vote. So just the recreation of us having a rollback of civil rights protections, knowing that people fought and marched and died and was enslaved and in prison for these things, and we don't do it. Honestly, it just saddens me. It saddens me deeply. So that's just kind of like one of the things to be mindful of, and to me, like I said, that's a big one, because I teach Black women every day how to navigate the system. And honestly, part of that is utilizing Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to fight these employers with a lawsuit. And oftentimes they can win and get a settlement because these employers don't want to put on public record that they were sued for discrimination, because then it opens and it leaves a track record for other people to come back, utilize this case and say, hey, these are some of the things that was happening to me as well, and it gives evidence, and it actually will help other people be able to go full throttle into lawsuits with these companies that think that they are untouchable. Another part of Project 2025 is the defunding of education. So the project proposes defunding the Department of Education, which automatically means that would eliminate Title I funding that supports schools in low-income areas. Of course, if this is eliminated, that automatically affects Black and Brown students. And I mean, we're already impacted now in 2024. So creating another barrier will make it where nearly impossible for little Black and brown students to go to school without dealing with racially discriminatory, exclusionary practices, and would further create barriers for them to even be able to get to higher education after their formative years of education, because of those different barriers. And I mean, parents just can't afford it. They think they can't afford it. And honestly, if you're always in survival mode, how can you even look to the next day of coming to school, learning, gaining this knowledge so you can put yourself into a better position? Even with the proposal of the defunded education, they are also talking about ending the income-based repayment option for student loans, making it higher education, and then less accessible again to Black and brown students that already face financial barriers and higher education anyway. And as you already know, we are fighting currently for even the Biden administration to go ahead and pass the elimination of student loan debt, because we already know that having student loan debt automatically creates a barrier when it comes to wanting to go and get a home, because it impacts your credit significantly and it goes towards your debt to income ratio. And then these fields do not pay you enough to offset and pay for your student loan debt while also being able to just live day in and out. Another thing that the Project 2025 supports is the punitive criminal justice. which, if you guys don't know already, they are building private prisons like no other right now, currently, as we're speaking. And with that, that means they have to find laws to find a way to criminalize Black and brown people so they can fill those prisons, because we live in a capitalistic society where it's all about the profits. And if we can have prisoners work for nothing, literally for pennies on the dollar, to create inventory right here in the U.S., then we don't have to outsource to other countries to get these goods. We don't have to pay people in the actual factories to get these goods, because we can just then force slavery and labor onto these prisoners. So when you think about any kind of laws, anything that's coming up, and I know right now the trend of this PPP and them coming back, and you know what, the first thing they doing is coming back to see who can we criminalize for getting this PPP loan, didn't have a business, and then put them in jail for censuses that literally do not equate to the crime that was actually committed. And if you think about just everyday people, they don't even have a criminal history, but them getting 15 to 20 years in federal prison just for them to fill the prison. So it's not that they gave a crime that made sense, or they gave a punishment that made sense. But thinking about, they will find reasons to punish Black and brown people and to forward their agenda, and we will have increase in racial profiling, police brutality, and the continuation of mass incarceration, which constantly affects us. This is another thing that I talked about on my podcast. So it's such an eerie feeling when you just think about you can do everything right, and they're going to still find a way to say, hey, you did it wrong, or pull the carpet from under you just so they can make an extra dollar. And like I told you guys, the prison business is $1 billion business. So do not get it confused when you do not vote what you are actually doing, which to me, if you are voting for Trump, you are automatically enacting the violence to Black and brown people. And that means you agree with it. So there is, just cut me off. Just cut me off and keep going, because I'm done with you. Be told that Project 2025 is an act of violence, like clear, blatant violence. So let's just keep on going. Just highlighting some of the things that's in that proposal. And it's so disgusting. It's actually very hard for me to even do this interview, even now. Not an interview, but this episode. But let's talk about how they want to get rid of the Office of Environmental Justice. Which, who is that? Why do they matter? So they want to, again, roll back the protections that were designed to combat environmental racism. What that means is, if you notice, if you've ever lived in a city, or you lived in projects, or you lived in predominantly Black neighborhoods, guess what you probably noticed? There's not a lot of greenery. There's not a lot of trees. So there's not a lot of fresh oxygen, one. You probably live by a lot of factories. So they will purposely build these factories that is causing and releasing hazardous pollutions into the air. They have you at factories that will release the fumes that will cause your kid to have lead poisoning. They will actually create these homes with paint. They will actually release these fumes. So that will automatically, again, take away the minimum protection that we already have to combat environmental racism, because that is a huge thing. Another thing is the redlining of how they set up where expressways are far. from the hood and we don't have that conveniency and that access. It's just, it's almost unbelievable to think that I'm really saying these things out loud, that these things are actually like could happen, right? So what does this mean? If we can't have this protection and we're getting sick, our kids getting sick, we don't have playgrounds for our kids, we don't have environmental things in our communities that helps with our overall mental health, psychological health, and our mental health, then this leads to more poor health outcomes. And another thing that the project advocates for is reducing Medicare and Medicaid funding. And it seeks to limit the access to afford health care, which will inadvertently worsen health outcomes for Black and Brown Americans who already have significant health disparities. So if we remove, now we fought, we got Obamacare, and then we have the Medicaid, Medicare. This is literally people's last fight and chance at having some form of free care. So if we limit the funding and we limit how many people is eligible, and it not only on top of the medical racism that you already experience when you have Medicaid and Medicare, and I'm just going to even talk about it even in the social work field. Like, I know a lot of private practice do not accept Medicaid, Medicare. So you can't even attend to the people that need treatment the most, for one. Two, you don't want to fight because they create so many barriers for clinicians to be reimbursed, to be able to be paneled, and then they don't have a safety net either for clinicians, for like clients that don't show up, which is very much likely when you are dealing with Medicare, Medicaid clients. But looking at it at a deeper level, yes, they do not come and they're not consistent with care because of all the barriers that they have to go through to even get care. And it might be as simple as being able to do your survey on a phone. How do you assume that people that cannot afford healthcare, do not have jobs, would be able to have a phone that is high tech enough to be able to check up on their appointments, look at their, get their reminders, get the call when they say, hey, you have an appointment, on the voicemail. Just like, I don't know. It's kind of like the progression with AI and everything now is creating this is racism, but this ableism and this discrimination, because it does not account for those people that do not have easily access to it. So that's another huge part of, if we are now going to have the elimination of our protection to have and be deserving of being in neighborhoods that are as conducive for our children, for ourselves, for our well-being and our health, then on top of that, to make matters worse, we are looking at possibly not even being able to have sufficient health care to even be able to help with the increase in the uprise. So just complete devastation. Like, it's given that we're going to a third world country, even though we supposedly live in one of the best countries there is. Another proposal is the voter suppression and census manipulation. This is another thing. So kind of the whole reason that I'm having this topic put on the platform is, if you do not value something, eventually they can take it away. So imagine not valuing your vote and now you no longer are able to vote again. So that means they can enforce stricter voting regulations that, again, will create more barriers, because in order to vote, you got to take off work, you got to go to polls, and I believe you can register now online. They can send you a ballot through the mail. So those kind of things can get eliminated. They can make harsher rules where they let every state individually create how they want people to vote, creating significant barriers that they know will affect the Black and Brown communities before it affects the majority and the privileged and the wealthy. They can weaken Black political power and further restrict access to fair representation in government, which amplifies voter suppression through intimidation and what is it called? Gerrymandering efforts. So it's imperative. It's almost life or death to not vote. Okay. And like I said, right now they are making efforts to make it a little easier. So while you have it, go and do it, please. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, because of course it affects me as a woman, is something that I passionately have been having conversations around it, but it's our reproductive rights and health. So the agenda proposes limiting reproductive rights by restricting access to abortions and other reproductive health services. So let's just put into perspective. When you have white men creating policy for women, that's where we already have the problem. Because when we think about having abortion is not always a means to get out of your responsibility or to have sex nonstop and then know that you have a way out. But think about that girl that was molested, that was raped, that literally cannot afford a child. But again, this kind of brings me back to an era in a time in history where they stuffed us. And this is when the Great Migration was going on, where we were migrating from the South up into the Midwest to the North. And they created these projects, these high-rise buildings, put all the black and brown people in them, let them basically kill off each other, criminalize each other, rape and do heinous things to each other because they left them scarcity, left them with absolutely no resources, but the bare minimum. So what is people doing? People are just having babies, welfare, having babies, welfare. And that's where we even got the narrative of this black welfare queen. So if we do not allow for abortions and we have black women that cannot afford it, and now you have to keep every single baby that comes, that leads us back into now I have a 2-bedroom with 6 children living in it. Because guess what? I couldn't get an abortion after being raped and molested by my father or by my uncle or by my mother's best friend. And because I am a trauma therapist that work with black women, this hits home to no other because if I could say 90% of my clients come with sexual trauma, and it's usually by someone that they know. So the fact that white men can justify how black women and what they should do, and women in general, what they should do with their bodies, it flabbergasted. It literally throws me for a loop. And when you think about abortions and how important it really could be, because for black women in particular, being able to carry a full-term baby could be a life or death situation. We talk about mortality rates, which is such a huge thing in the black community. So now I'm forced to put my body under a state of chronic stress for 9 months because I couldn't get an abortion. My kidneys, my livers are failing because I couldn't get an abortion. And I knew it. And being a black woman, not being able to get the well-needed care, not being able to get a midwife, an OBG, gynae nurse, just someone that really understands black women and what it means to be black and carry out a full-term baby. I'm getting diabetes, have high blood pressure, swollen feet, when my body probably already is under significant trauma and stress from the moment I was born until now, because the body keeps the score. And then I have to navigate all of these different health issues that could come about while I'm pregnant, and possibly even lose my job if I'm taking off work too much to tend to my very sick self, to my medical appointments. Like there is a snowball effect that happens when we begin to force women to keep the babies. So I'm just asking you guys, and I'm sure you see it all over your social media, but vote. Please vote. Um, please, because if Project 2025 agenda represents a rollback of social justice reforms that amplify structural inequalities in areas critical for the Black and Brown communities, so including that education, that employment, the healthcare, the civil rights protections, these proposed policies would only increase our racial disparities across multiple domains, intensifying our socio-economical and political challenges that we already are navigating and are struggling with. So, as always, rise up and relate deeply, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.